The sky had settled into a deep shade of amber as Sophie Carter walked through the quiet streets toward the community center, the crisp evening air carrying the faint scent of flowers and city pavement. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of activity, discovery, and subtle connection, and tonight felt like the culmination of everything that had been quietly unfolding. Sophie entered the center, where volunteers were wrapping up for the day, folding chairs and stacking supplies neatly along the walls, their chatter soft and content. Adam Walker was waiting near the front, a small smile on his face and an air of calm authority that had always set him apart from the world around them. As she approached, he greeted her with warmth and sincerity, acknowledging not only her contribution to the project, but also the patience, dedication, and kindness that had defined her actions from the very beginning. They walked together to a small outdoor space behind the center, where fairy lights had been strung between poles, casting a gentle glow over the garden beds and neatly arranged tables, creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and celebratory. Adam paused and turned to Sophie, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten and a flutter of anticipation stir within her. He spoke with measured care, recounting the journey they had shared over the past days, the quiet lunches, the small gestures of generosity, and the dedication she had shown to both the project and the people it served. Sophie listened, her hands clasped in front of her, feeling the weight of the moment and the significance of his words. Then, with a calm and deliberate motion, Adam reached into a small box he carried and presented Sophie with a simple, elegant ring, its design delicate but thoughtful, a symbol of commitment and recognition. Her fingers trembled as she accepted it, the cool metal pressing against her skin and sending a shiver of realization through her. He spoke again, expressing his desire not only to share in the work they had begun, but also to formally acknowledge the bond that had grown between them, forged through shared purpose, mutual respect, and the quiet courage Sophie had displayed. The lights around them flickered gently in the evening breeze, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. The ordinary city and its noises fading into the background as the significance of the moment took center stage. Sophie felt tears gather in her eyes, a mixture of joy, relief, and an overwhelming sense of being seen and appreciated for who she truly was. She could hardly believe that the simple acts of paying for a stranger's meal, of offering care and attention without expectation, had led to this extraordinary recognition and affirmation. Adam took her hand gently, guiding her to look around at the garden and the empty tables, symbolizing the journey they had shared, the impact of their efforts on the community, and the potential for the future they could build together. The evening sky deepened into shades of violet and gold, and Sophie felt a sense of completion, a resolution that was both emotional and practical, knowing that her life had been irrevocably changed, her kindness rewarded, and a partnership formed that extended beyond the confines of the diner or the center into something enduring and profound. As they walked back toward the main doors together, the soft glow of the lights illuminating their path, Sophie realized that every choice, every small act of generosity, had led to this clear, unmistakable conclusion, that genuine kindness could bridge gaps, transform lives, and create connections that were both meaningful and lasting, leaving no doubt in her mind that this chapter had closed with a clear and joyful ending for both herself and Adam. The sky had settled into a deep shade of amber as Sophie Carter walked through the quiet streets toward the community center, the crisp evening air carrying the faint scent of flowers and city pavement. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of activity, discovery, and subtle connection, and tonight felt like the culmination of everything that had been quietly unfolding. Sophie entered the center, where volunteers were wrapping up for the day, folding chairs and stacking supplies neatly along the walls, their chatter soft and content. Adam Walker was waiting near the front, a small smile on his face and an air of calm authority that had always set him apart from the world around them. As she approached, he greeted her with warmth and sincerity, acknowledging not only her contribution to the project, but also the patience, dedication, and kindness that had defined her actions from the very beginning. They walked together to a small outdoor space behind the center, where fairy lights had been strung between poles, casting a gentle glow over the garden beds and neatly arranged tables, creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and celebratory. Adam paused and turned to Sophie, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten and a flutter of anticipation stir within her. He spoke with measured care, recounting the journey they had shared over the past days, the quiet lunches, the small gestures of generosity, and the dedication she had shown to both the project and the people it served. Sophie listened, her hands clasped in front of her, feeling the weight of the moment and the significance of his words. Then, with a calm and deliberate motion, Adam reached into a small box he carried and presented Sophie with a simple, elegant ring, its design delicate but thoughtful, a symbol of commitment and recognition. Her fingers trembled as she accepted it, the cool metal pressing against her skin and sending a shiver of realization through her. He spoke again, expressing his desire not only to share in the work they had begun, but also to formally acknowledge the bond that had grown between them, forged through shared purpose, mutual respect, and the quiet courage Sophie had displayed. The lights around them flickered gently in the evening breeze, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the ordinary city and its noises fading into the background as the significance of the moment took center stage. Sophie felt tears gather in her eyes, a mixture of joy, relief, and an overwhelming sense of being seen and appreciated for who she truly was. She could hardly believe that the simple acts of paying for a stranger's meal, of offering care and attention without expectation, had led to this extraordinary recognition and affirmation. Adam took her hand gently, guiding her to look around at the garden and the empty tables, symbolizing the journey they had shared, the impact of their efforts on the community, and the potential for the future they could build together. The evening sky deepened into shades of violet and gold, and Sophie felt a sense of completion, a resolution that was both emotional and practical, knowing that her life had been irrevocably changed, her kindness rewarded, and a partnership formed that extended beyond the confines of the diner or the center into something enduring and profound. As they walked back toward the main doors together, the soft glow of the lights illuminating their path, Sophie realized that every choice, every small act of generosity, had led to this clear, unmistakable conclusion, that genuine kindness could bridge gaps, transform lives, and create connections that were both meaningful and lasting, leaving no doubt in her mind that this chapter had closed with a clear and joyful ending for both herself and Adam. The next morning, Sophie Carter awoke to the sound of a dripping faucet in her tiny apartment, the early sunlight filtering through the thin curtains and casting faint stripes across the worn wooden floor. She rose slowly, stretching her arms and rubbing the sleep from her eyes, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulders from the long hours at the diner. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of traffic on the street below, a stark contrast to the bustling environment she would face in just a few hours. After pulling on her uniform, tying her hair back, and checking that she had enough change for the morning coffee run, she paused for a moment, thinking about the man in the corner of the diner whose meal she had been quietly paying for. The image of his dark coat and the intensity of his gaze lingered in her mind, mingling with the practical concerns of overdue rent and the stack of bills she still had to sort through. As she walked to the diner, the chill of the morning air bit through her thin coat, and the sidewalks were slick with the remnants of last night's rain, making each step a careful negotiation with the uneven pavement. She arrived at the diner to find it already filling with customers, the clatter of dishes and soft chatter creating a familiar rhythm that soothed some of her tension. Sophie moved quickly, her apron tied neatly around her waist, greeting regulars with a polite nod and directing the new waitress to the coffee station. She kept an eye on the far corner, anticipating the familiar presence of the man she had been helping, and sure enough, Adam Walker arrived just as the clock struck 11, his movements precise and understated as he settled into his usual seat. Sophie prepared his meal with practiced efficiency, placing the sandwiches on a tray along with a glass of iced tea, and walked over to his table, her heart picking up pace even though she tried to keep her expression neutral. When she set the tray down and adjusted the napkin neatly beside his plate, he looked up and offered the faintest of smiles, a small acknowledgement that seemed to warm her despite the cold morning. The interaction was brief, but it carried weight, and Sophie returned to the counter feeling both exhilarated and unsettled, wondering if he had noticed her small gestures or if they had simply blended into the background of his routine. Throughout the morning, she continued her tasks, bussing tables and refilling drinks, her mind intermittently drifting to him and the mysterious aura that surrounded him, a curiosity that now mingled with the tangible pressures of her own life. Lunch hour approached again, and the diner swelled with customers seeking a quick bite, the aroma of fresh bread and brewed coffee wrapping the space in a comforting embrace. Sophie moved through the crowd with practiced grace, carrying plates and answering questions, all the while aware that at any moment, Adam might look up and meet her gaze again, a silent communication passing between them that no words could capture. After the rush, she collected herself behind the counter, counting tips and straightening menus, and allowed herself a moment to breathe, reflecting on how these small interactions had begun to punctuate the monotony of her days, giving her a sense of connection and significance that she had not felt in months. Outside, the sky had cleared from the overnight rain, the sunlight glinting off car windows and puddles on the sidewalk, painting the city in warm, hopeful tones. Sophie stepped outside briefly to inhale the crisp air, feeling the weight of her responsibilities balanced by a subtle sense of anticipation. The knowledge that her simple act of kindness might have set into motion a series of events that could change the trajectory of both her life and the life of the man she had quietly aided. Each breath carried with it both apprehension and hope, a delicate tension that made her pulse quicken as she prepared to return inside to continue the rhythm of work and quiet observation, and to see if the next interaction would bring answers, surprises, or something entirely unexpected. By mid-morning, the diner had settled into a quieter rhythm, the clatter of dishes and the low hum of conversation forming a steady backdrop as Sophie Carter moved from table to table, her movements precise and deliberate. The sunlight poured through the front windows, casting long beams across the linoleum floor and illuminating the specks of dust that floated lazily in the warm air. She wiped down the counters again, her mind wandering to the man in the corner, Adam Walker, whose quiet presence had become a strange constant in her life. Unlike other customers, he did not glance around impatiently or tap on his phone incessantly. Instead, he seemed absorbed in thought, quietly observing the world from his secluded vantage point. Sophie had begun to notice small details over the past several days. The crease in his coat sleeve, the way he adjusted his napkin before taking a sip of coffee, the subtle pause before he accepted the envelope she placed beside his lunch. Each gesture suggested a careful attentiveness that was almost hypnotic, drawing her curiosity deeper with every encounter. As she refilled the sugar containers and straightened the condiments on the tables, Sophie could not help but feel a quiet anticipation, a delicate tension that hummed beneath the ordinary rhythm of the morning. The memory of yesterday lingered, the way his eyes had met hers with a flicker of recognition that she could not place, and the thought stirred a mix of excitement and apprehension that made her stomach tighten. During a brief lull in the crowd, Sophie approached his table once more, carrying a fresh cup of tea, steam curling gently into the air, and placed it carefully on the saucer in front of him. He looked up and offered a small nod of thanks, his expression inscrutable yet tinged with something that felt like acknowledgement, a silent dialogue that passed between them without words. The moment was fleeting, yet it resonated in Sophie with an intensity that made the mundane work of the diner feel weighty and significant. After returning to the counter, she adjusted her apron and took a quick sip of water, her eyes scanning the room and catching snippets of conversation from other customers. But her mind remained tethered to him, to the quiet way he seemed to inhabit the space, and to the unspoken curiosity that lingered in his gaze. Outside the windows, the city moved at its usual pace, taxis honking in the distance, and pedestrians hurrying along the sidewalks. But within the diner, time felt suspended in the small rituals of preparation, service, and observation. By noon, the lunch crowd swelled once again, and Sophie navigated between tables with deft efficiency, serving regulars and newcomers alike while keeping a careful watch on Adam, who remained in his corner, quietly observing the room with measured patience. She noticed that he had begun to interact subtly with the staff, a nod here, a brief smile there, and it struck her that these small moments of human connection seemed to mirror the kindness she had extended toward him, though she did not yet understand the full impact of her actions. As the line of customers dwindled and the final plates were cleared from the tables, Sophie allowed herself a brief pause, leaning against the counter and reflecting on the pattern that had emerged over the past week, the rhythm of generosity and silent acknowledgement that seemed to form a bridge between her life and his. The thought was both thrilling and unnerving, for she sensed that the ordinary encounters of the diner were quietly setting the stage for something far greater, a shift that neither of them could yet predict, yet one that carried the unmistakable weight of possibility and change, a subtle tension that made her pulse quicken as she considered the unknown path that lay ahead for both herself and the man she had come to notice so intently. As the afternoon sun climbed higher in the sky, Sophie Carter moved through the diner with a practiced rhythm, refilling drinks, clearing tables, and keeping a careful watch on Adam Walker in the corner. He sat with his usual posture, a calm figure in the midst of bustling activity, and Sophie found herself observing him with a mixture of curiosity and unease, wondering who he truly was and why he carried himself with such quiet confidence. The soft clink of dishes and the low murmur of conversation filled the air around her, yet her focus remained on the man she had been quietly helping for the past several days. With each tray she carried to other tables, she stole glances at him, noting the small details that she had begun to recognize, the way he adjusted. His napkin just so, the slight crease in his coat, the precise way he sipped his tea. These moments, subtle as they were, seemed to carry weight beyond the ordinary, and Sophie could not shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. Her hands moved automatically, wiping down a counter and straightening menus, but her mind wandered, imagining the life of the man she had quietly assisted, wondering if he noticed the envelopes she left beside his meals, and if he understood the effort it took for her to give when she had so little. The bell above the diner door jingled repeatedly as new customers arrived, and she greeted them with her usual polite smile, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the quiet man who had become an unexpected constant in her day. As she approached his table with another tray, she felt a momentary flutter in her chest, the anticipation of interaction mixing with the normal nerves of a busy workday. She placed the meal before him and adjusted the napkin on the side, and for the first time he looked directly at her, his dark eyes holding a flicker of recognition and something unspoken that made her heart beat faster. The seconds stretched as they shared a silent connection, and Sophie quickly turned away, pretending to check on another table, though the warmth of the moment lingered with her. After completing her tasks, she leaned briefly against the counter, taking a slow breath and considering the pattern that had emerged over the past week, the quiet exchanges that had slowly begun to define her mornings and afternoons. Outside, the city carried on, pedestrians moving quickly along the sidewalks, taxis weaving through traffic, yet inside the diner, time felt suspended in the gentle hum of activity, the quiet gestures, and the subtle acknowledgments that passed between her and Adam. She returned to the counter to refill coffee cups, her hands moving automatically as she reflected on the small impact her actions had on the day, and perhaps on the life of the man she had come to notice so keenly. Each customer interaction felt like a heartbeat in the rhythm of the day, yet the anticipation of seeing Adam again added a tension that she could not ignore, a quiet reminder that her simple acts of generosity might be quietly shaping something far larger than she had imagined. As the lunch rush began to taper, Sophie allowed herself a brief moment to lean back and observe him once more, the corners of his mouth lifting ever so slightly in a private acknowledgement, and she felt a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope, wondering how the quiet connection that had grown between them might unfold in the days to come. Every detail seemed magnified in her mind, from the warmth of the tea in his hands to the soft light falling across his face, and she could not help but feel that the ordinary patterns of the diner were preparing the stage for a revelation that neither of them could yet foresee. The weight of her responsibilities mingled with the subtle thrill of the unknown, creating a tension that both grounded her in the present and pulled her forward into the possibilities that awaited, a delicate balance between routine and anticipation, ordinary life and the quiet stirrings of something extraordinary. The afternoon sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, casting long, golden streaks across the floors of the diner and highlighting the subtle patterns in the worn linoleum. Sophie Carter moved with measured efficiency, clearing tables and refilling coffee cups. Yet her mind was caught in a web of curiosity and anticipation that she could not shake. Adam Walker had been sitting in his usual corner all afternoon, quietly observing the room, his posture relaxed but his eyes attentive, scanning the flow of customers and staff with a precision that suggested he was aware of far more than he let on. Sophie approached his table carrying a small tray with a fresh iced tea and a plate of sandwiches, the slight tremor in her hands betraying the nervous energy she had been trying to suppress. She set the items down with care, arranging the napkins neatly beside the plate as she offered a polite smile, and for the first time, Adam looked up and spoke to her, his voice calm and measured, asking about her day and whether the diner had been busy. The unexpected attention sent a flutter through her chest, a mixture of surprise and intrigue that made her momentarily forget the clatter of dishes and the murmur of conversation around her. As she returned to the counter, she kept stealing glances in his direction, noting the subtle way he adjusted his coat sleeve and the thoughtful expression on his face. Later, as the lunch crowd thinned, she found herself wiping down the counter with slightly more force than necessary, the tension in her shoulders a reflection of the anticipation building within her. When the last few customers departed and the bell above the door chimed softly, Adam stood and approached her, walking with a quiet assurance that made her heart quicken. He introduced himself fully for the first time, his words deliberate, revealing not only his name, but also the fact that he was the owner of a chain of upscale restaurants throughout the city, the very kind of establishment where she had occasionally dreamed of working, though she had never imagined such an encounter. Sophie froze for a brief moment, the implications of his revelation settling over her like a warm yet disorienting wave, the recognition of his identity mingling with the astonishment that he had noticed her, that he had silently appreciated her consistent acts of kindness. Adam spoke gently, acknowledging her daily gestures and the quiet care she had shown, and Sophie felt a mix of disbelief and gratitude, her mind racing to reconcile the ordinary waitress she saw in the mirror each morning with the extraordinary acknowledgement she was receiving now. He invited her to sit for a moment, to share a coffee before he left, and as they exchanged words, the casual atmosphere of the diner transformed into a space charged with connection and the unspoken understanding that something significant was beginning to unfold between them. The air seemed to thrum with possibility, and Sophie felt the weight of her small, consistent kindness being recognized in a way she had never experienced, a validation that stirred hope and a quiet excitement in her chest. As the conversation drew to a close and Adam prepared to leave, he left her with a thoughtful remark about the importance of noticing and rewarding simple acts of generosity, a sentiment that lingered in her mind long after he had stepped out into the fading light of the afternoon. Sophie returned to her duties, moving with a newfound lightness, her steps infused with the awareness that her quiet attention to others had not gone unnoticed, and that the world could hold surprises beyond what she had dared to imagine, a delicate thread of anticipation weaving itself into the fabric of her day as she prepared for the next encounter, knowing that the ordinary rhythm of her life was quietly being reshaped by an extraordinary connection she had nurtured without even realizing it. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the sunlight spilling through the blinds of Sophie Carter's small apartment and casting long, soft stripes across the floor. She stretched and rubbed the sleep from her eyes, feeling the familiar stiffness in her shoulders from long shifts at the diner. Yet a sense of anticipation hummed beneath her fatigue. Today felt different, though she could not say exactly why. Pulling on her uniform and tying her dark hair back in a ponytail, she paused by the window, watching the city slowly come to life as people hurried along the sidewalks, the distant rumble of traffic filling the air. The memory of yesterday lingered, Adam Walker's voice calm and deliberate as he acknowledged the small gesture she had made, the way he had smiled with a quiet recognition that seemed almost out of place in the hurried, impersonal world of the diner. Sophie wondered what he had thought as he left, and the thought brought a strange warmth to her chest, mingling with a nervous flutter of curiosity. She arrived at the diner to find the usual morning crowd beginning to settle in, the soft clatter of dishes and low murmur of conversation forming a familiar rhythm as she moved through her tasks with practiced efficiency. As she prepared his usual lunch, arranging the sandwiches and iced tea neatly on a tray, her hands moved automatically, though her mind was occupied with questions about him, about his life outside the corner table, and about what motivated a man to carry himself with such quiet dignity. Placing the tray before him, she noticed the subtle way he adjusted the napkin on the side and the faint lift of his eyes to meet hers, an acknowledgement that seemed weighted with unspoken meaning. After he sipped his tea, he set the cup down and spoke for the first time with intention, inviting her to sit for a moment, and Sophie hesitated, then carefully took the stool across from him, her movements deliberate yet slightly tense. The diner seemed to fade around them, the background noise dimming as he spoke about a project he was launching, a charitable initiative to support local communities, and how he believed that small acts of kindness could create ripples far beyond their immediate effect. His voice carried both authority and sincerity, a combination that made her lean forward slightly, listening intently, caught between awe and disbelief. A slow sip of tea, the subtle rhythm of his movements suggesting a careful observation of the world and perhaps of her. Her own hands shook slightly as she wiped down counters and replenished condiments, the weight of recent events pressing on her thoughts. Yesterday's conversation had lingered in her mind, Adam inviting her to join the new charitable initiative, offering her a place where her ideas and dedication could have impact beyond the ordinary scope of her life. Yet, as she returned to her work, a small knot of uncertainty had begun to form. She questioned whether she truly belonged in a world where every action seemed scrutinized and where opportunities came so suddenly, tied to someone of such power and influence. As the diner filled with the mid-morning crowd, Sophie found herself moving through her duties with an unusual awareness, each interaction with customers feeling more deliberate, more intentional, as if the small choices she made now carried additional weight. She carried plates of sandwiches and glasses of iced tea with care, offering polite smiles and friendly words, while her thoughts continually returned to the quiet man in the corner, whose presence had become a peculiar anchor in her day. After delivering a tray to a nearby table, she glanced at him again and caught a hint of a smile, fleeting and almost imperceptible, yet enough to send a ripple of warmth through her chest. She returned to the counter, adjusting her apron and taking a moment to count the tips, allowing herself a brief pause in which to consider the proposition Adam had made. It was not just an offer of work, but an opportunity to step into a world she had never imagined, to use her talents and her care for others in a broader capacity, and the thought both thrilled and unnerved her. The afternoon continued in a steady rhythm, customers coming and going, the soft hum of conversation and the occasional clink of silverware filling the air, yet Sophie felt the underlying tension of possibility with each passing moment. When the lunch rush began to taper off, she carried a tray to Adam's table once more, her pulse quickening as she placed the items before him and straightened the napkin beside his plate. He looked up at her, meeting her gaze with an expression that held a mixture of respect, curiosity, and perhaps something more, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond that had been forming quietly over the past week. For a moment, time seemed to slow, the ambient noise of the diner fading into the background as she considered the path that lay ahead, the choices she had made, and the possibilities that were now within reach. Each gesture, each smile, each careful action seemed charged with meaning, a reminder that her kindness had not gone unnoticed and that her own life might be on the cusp of a transformation she had never anticipated. As she moved back to the counter to complete the final orders, she felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a quiet anticipation that suggested the ordinary patterns of the diner were now intertwined with extraordinary potential, and that the choices she made in these seemingly simple moments could ripple outward, shaping the next chapter of her life and the life of the man she had come to notice so profoundly. The interplay of routine and expectation, of daily duties and unexpected opportunity, settled around her like a delicate tension, urging her forward even as she maintained the calm and efficiency required to navigate the busy afternoon with grace and precision, aware that the smallest acts of care and attention were quietly building toward a larger revelation that neither she nor Adam could yet fully imagine. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of the diner, casting long streaks of warm light across the tables and highlighting the worn edges of menus and napkin holders. Sophie Carter moved with measured efficiency, refilling drinks and clearing plates, yet her mind remained tangled with the events of the past few days, especially the invitation Adam Walker had extended for her to join his charitable initiative. The offer was generous and unprecedented, and Sophie found herself questioning whether she was truly capable of stepping into such a role, whether she could meet the expectations that came with it. She polished the countertop with deliberate motions, trying to focus on the physical tasks in front of her, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Adam, the quiet man whose presence had become a constant in her day and whose acknowledgement of her small gestures had left an indelible mark on her confidence. The diner buzzed with the early dinner crowd, the clatter of cutlery and hum of conversation a comforting yet distracting backdrop as she moved through the routine, balancing trays of food and offering polite smiles to patrons. Sophie kept a careful watch on Adam in his corner, noticing subtle changes in his demeanor, the way he seemed slightly more engaged with the environment around him, perhaps reflecting on the conversation they had shared earlier. As she set a plate of sandwiches and a glass of iced tea before him, he looked up and offered a faint smile, a subtle indication that he was aware of the thoughts that had been occupying her mind, though he said nothing directly. The brief exchange left Sophie with a sense of both reassurance and tension, an awareness that her small acts of kindness were now interwoven with opportunities and expectations far beyond what she had anticipated. After returning to the counter, she paused for a moment to straighten the menus and wipe a spill from the edge of the tabletop, taking a deep breath and allowing herself a moment of reflection. Her mind wandered to the upcoming project, imagining the scope of her responsibilities and the impact she could have on the community, but also the potential scrutiny from others who might question her motives or capabilities. The uncertainty weighed heavily, and Sophie felt the pull between excitement and apprehension as she considered the choices before her. As the evening progressed, she continued her duties while maintaining an awareness of Adam, noting the subtle ways he interacted with the environment and the staff, a quiet attentiveness that mirrored the care she had extended toward him in the past week. Each gesture, each small action, seemed amplified in significance, a delicate reminder of the fragile balance between kindness and expectation. The dinner rush began to wane, leaving the diner bathed in the warm glow of overhead lights, and Sophie found herself leaning briefly against the counter, her mind reflecting on the sequence of events that had brought her to this point. The recognition she had received from Adam, the offer to participate in a meaningful initiative, and the growing sense of connection between them created a tension that was both exhilarating and unnerving. She realized that her life, once defined by the constraints of her routine and modest means, was now opening to possibilities she had never imagined, and the weight of anticipation settled over her like a quiet storm, urging careful thought and measured action. The ordinary cadence of the diner, the mundane tasks and interactions, now felt imbued with extraordinary significance, each moment carrying the potential to shape the next chapter of her life, and perhaps the life of the man who had quietly observed and acknowledged her generosity. The hum of conversation, The soft clinking of dishes and the faint aroma of brewed coffee created a comforting soundtrack to her contemplation, grounding her in the present even as her thoughts reached toward the possibilities of the near future. Sophie adjusted her apron once more, moving to refill coffee cups and take care of the remaining tables, aware that the choices she made in these seemingly small moments could ripple outward in ways she had not yet foreseen, shaping both opportunity and connection, and leaving her poised on the edge of discovery and the unknown. The evening crowd had thinned, leaving the diner bathed in a soft, golden glow from the overhead lights, their warmth reflecting off the polished surfaces and casting gentle shadows across the worn wooden floor. Sophie Carter moved among the remaining tables, her movement steady but her mind alert, replaying the events of the past week and the quiet interactions with Adam Walker that had gradually reshaped her daily life. The notion that someone of his stature had noticed her, a waitress barely managing to cover her rent, filled her with a mixture of pride, disbelief, and apprehension. She cleared a table of empty plates and carefully wiped down the surface, her hands moving automatically while her thoughts remained tangled in the delicate balance of curiosity and caution. Adam had lingered after the usual lunch rush, speaking softly to her, expressing his hope that she would consider joining his charitable initiative and offering insight into the scope of the work and the impact it could have on the community. The sincerity in his voice and the steady calm of his demeanor made Sophie feel simultaneously encouraged and overwhelmed, aware of the opportunities before her and the responsibilities they implied. As she carried a tray of iced teas back to the counter, she reflected on the subtle changes that had occurred in the diner over the past few days, the small acknowledgments and gestures that now seemed to carry greater weight, creating a sense of connection that transcended the ordinary rhythm of her work. The idea that her consistent acts of kindness, performed quietly and without expectation, had led to recognition from someone she respected was both empowering and disorienting, leaving her to navigate the thin line between humility and the newfound confidence she felt. She paused briefly behind the counter, adjusting her apron and taking a deep breath, the ambient noise of the diner filling the silence as she contemplated the decision that now rested squarely on her shoulders. It was not just a choice about accepting a position or participating in a project, but a choice about stepping into a world that was unfamiliar and potentially transformative, a world where her actions could influence not only her own trajectory, but also the lives of many others. The soft murmur of conversation, the clink of silverware, and the occasional laughter from a table of regulars created a comforting rhythm. Yet beneath it all, Sophie sensed a quiet tension, an anticipation that each small gesture and careful decision could ripple outward in unexpected ways. Adam approached the counter then, his presence calm, yet commanding, and spoke with a clarity and warmth that cut through her apprehension, reaffirming the opportunity before her and acknowledging her hesitancy as natural and reasonable. His words carried weight, not only as an expression of genuine respect, but also as an invitation to trust in her abilities and in the integrity of her actions, a subtle reinforcement of the value of kindness and commitment. Sophie listened intently, feeling the pressure of her internal doubts, yet simultaneously sensing the potential for growth and meaningful contribution that lay just within reach. The interplay of ordinary routine and extraordinary opportunity created a tension that pressed gently against her awareness, urging careful reflection and deliberate action. As the last customers departed and the din of the diner faded into the quiet hum of the city beyond the windows, Sophie felt the weight of her contemplation, the merging of personal responsibility, ethical consideration, and the possibility of a meaningful connection with someone whose presence had quietly altered the rhythm of her life. Every detail, from the precise placement of napkins to the measured tone of Adam's voice, seemed imbued with significance. And as she straightened the final menu and wiped the last table clean, she understood that the decisions she made in the coming hours would mark a turning point, shaping not only her future, but also the subtle unfolding of a bond forged through attention, care, and the simple, enduring power of human kindness. The morning was crisp and bright, the sun spilling golden light over the quiet streets as Sophie Carter stepped out of her small apartment and made her way toward the diner, her mind alive with anticipation for the new project she had agreed to join with Adam Walker. The city seemed to hum with a gentle energy, the sound of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog blending into a steady rhythm that mirrored the excitement coursing through her thoughts. Sophie had spent the previous evening organizing her notes and planning the first steps of the charitable initiative, imagining how she could use her experience and perspective to make a tangible difference in the community. Her footsteps were brisk along the sidewalk, the chill in the morning air reminding her that spring had not yet fully arrived, and she adjusted the strap of her bag, feeling the weight of both responsibility and opportunity pressing against her. As she arrived at the diner, the familiar scent of brewed coffee and toasted bread greeted her, a comforting reminder of routine even as her life was beginning to shift in unexpected ways. Adam Walker was already present, seated at his usual corner table, reviewing a set of documents with an intensity that suggested careful planning and consideration. When he looked up and saw her entering, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips, a silent acknowledgement of a new chapter they were embarking upon together. Sophie moved to greet him, her heart quickening as she approached, and they exchanged a few polite words before heading toward the community center where the project was to be based. The space was a modest but functional facility, filled with tables and chairs ready for volunteers, and walls adorned with posters illustrating past initiatives and upcoming events. As they began setting up, Sophie felt a sense of purpose she had not experienced in months, the ordinary concerns of rent and bills fading slightly in the presence of meaningful work. She organized supplies, labeled donation bins, and mapped out routes for the mobile outreach teams, her mind buzzing with ideas and the possibilities of impact. Adam provided guidance and encouragement, balancing direction with trust, allowing Sophie to take initiative while gently steering the larger vision of the project. The day unfolded with a rhythm of activity that was both exhausting and exhilarating. Sophie moving from task to task with a focus that left little room for doubt, her hands busy, but her heart lightened by the knowledge that her efforts were contributing to something larger than herself. Volunteers arrived in the afternoon, and she greeted them with warmth and confidence, explaining their roles and the importance of each contribution, while Adam observed and offered support where needed, creating an atmosphere of collaboration and respect. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor and bathing the room in a soft amber glow, Sophie paused to look around to the space they had transformed together, the organized tables, labeled supplies, and the quiet energy of people ready to serve the community. A sense of accomplishment swelled within her, mingled with a growing awareness of the bond that had formed between her and Adam, forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. The ordinary days of the diner now seemed a distant memory, replaced by this new life of initiative, kindness, and collaboration, and Sophie felt a quiet thrill at the thought of what they could accomplish together. As the evening closed in and the last volunteers departed, Sophie and Adam took a moment to reflect on the day, their conversation filled with ideas, hopes, and plans for the future, a gentle acknowledgement that the acts of care and dedication that had begun quietly in the diner were now blossoming into something meaningful, both in their work and in the subtle, growing connection between them. The city outside settled into its nightly rhythm, and within the community center, the soft hum of conversation, the echo of footsteps, and the lingering warmth of shared effort created a sense of completion and anticipation, a quiet prelude to the next chapter of Sophie Carter's life and the unfolding story of her partnership with Adam Walker. The evening air was warm and tinged with the scent of blooming flowers as Sophie Carter stepped into the small community garden adjacent to the center where the charitable initiative had taken root. The fading sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a soft, golden glow over the freshly planted beds and the neat rows of vegetables and flowers that volunteers had tended throughout the day. Sophie adjusted her sleeves and looked around at the quiet activity of cleanup, the soft laughter of those finishing their tasks blending with the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the city. Adam Walker was beside her, carrying a small box filled with carefully arranged envelopes and a delicate ring, a gesture that seemed both intimate and intentional in the quiet of the late afternoon. He looked at her with a calm yet earnest expression, his dark eyes reflecting the waning sunlight, and Sophie felt a flutter of anticipation and nervous excitement ripple through her chest. As he spoke, his words were steady and deliberate, acknowledging the dedication and care she had shown in organizing and leading the initiative, and emphasizing how her actions had not only helped the community, but had also revealed her character, integrity, and genuine kindness. Sophie felt her heart swell at the sincerity in his voice, and a mixture of disbelief and gratitude made her hands clench lightly at her sides. Adam reached into the small box and pulled out a simple yet elegant ring, placing it carefully into her hand, the metal cool against her skin. Alongside it was a handwritten note that echoed the sentiments he had just expressed, reflecting on her thoughtful actions and the quiet generosity she had consistently displayed. Sophie looked up at him, her eyes wide with emotion, realizing the depth of the gesture, that it was not only a token of affection, but also a recognition of the impact of her consistent, selfless care for others. The garden around them seemed to fade into a soft blur, the sounds of the city dimming, leaving only the two of them in this intimate, suspended moment, the significance of the act resonating deeply within her. Adam spoke once more, explaining that the ring was a symbol of commitment, not only to their growing connection, but also to the acknowledgement that genuine kindness and thoughtful action could create ripples far beyond the immediate moment. Sophie felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a mixture of joy, relief, and the overwhelming sense of being seen and appreciated for who she truly was. She struggled to find words, but Adam simply smiled gently, giving her the space to absorb the magnitude of what was happening, the silent affirmation that her dedication, thoughtfulness, and quiet courage had led to this moment of recognition and reward. As she looked down at the ring, and then back at Adam, a wave of clarity and certainty washed over her, the uncertainty that had once shadowed her decisions replaced by the understanding that her consistent actions, though small and unassuming, had been noticed and valued in a way that would forever alter the trajectory of her life. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and Sophie felt the weight of the day lift slightly, replaced by a hopeful anticipation for the future, a sense of security and connection she had never imagined possible, knowing that her acts of kindness had forged a bridge not only to Adam, but also to a future filled with promise, shared purpose, and a deep, genuine bond that would continue to grow with each passing day. The sky had settled into a deep shade of amber as Sophie Carter walked through the quiet streets toward the community center, the crisp evening air carrying the faint scent of flowers and city pavement. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of activity, discovery, and subtle connection, and tonight felt like the culmination of everything that had been quietly unfolding. Sophie entered the center, where volunteers were wrapping up for the day, folding chairs and stacking supplies neatly along the walls, their chatter soft and content. Adam Walker was waiting near the front, a small smile on his face and an air of calm authority that had always set him apart from the world around them. As she approached, he greeted her with warmth and sincerity, acknowledging not only her contribution to the project, but also the patience, dedication, and kindness that had defined her actions from the very beginning. They walked together to a small outdoor space behind the center, where fairy lights had been strung between poles, casting a gentle glow over the garden beds and neatly arranged tables, creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and celebratory. Adam paused and turned to Sophie, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten and a flutter of anticipation stir within her. He spoke with measured care, recounting the journey they had shared over the past days, the quiet lunches, the small gestures of generosity, and the dedication she had shown to both the project and the people it served. Sophie listened, her hands clasped in front of her, feeling the weight of the moment and the significance of his words. Then, with a calm and deliberate motion, Adam reached into a small box he carried and presented Sophie with a simple, elegant ring, its design delicate but thoughtful, a symbol of commitment and recognition. Her fingers trembled as she accepted it, the cool metal pressing against her skin and sending a shiver of realization through her. He spoke again, expressing his desire not only to share in the work they had begun, but also to formally acknowledge the bond that had grown between them, forged through shared purpose, mutual respect, and the quiet courage Sophie had displayed. The lights around them flickered gently in the evening breeze, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the ordinary city and its noises fading into the background as the significance of the moment took center stage. Sophie felt tears gather in her eyes, a mixture of joy, relief, and an overwhelming sense of being seen and appreciated for who she truly was. She could hardly believe that the simple acts of paying for a stranger's meal, of offering care and attention without expectation, had led to this extraordinary recognition and affirmation. Adam took her hand gently, guiding her to look around at the garden and the empty tables, symbolizing the journey they had shared, the impact of their efforts on the community, and the potential for the future they could build together. The evening sky deepened into shades of violet and gold, and Sophie felt a sense of completion, a resolution that was both emotional and practical, knowing that her life had been irrevocably changed, her kindness rewarded, and a partnership formed that extended beyond the confines of the diner or the center into something enduring and profound. As they walked back toward the main doors together, the soft glow of the lights illuminating their path, Sophie realized that every choice, every small act of generosity, had led to this clear, unmistakable conclusion, that genuine kindness could bridge gaps, transform lives, and create connections that were both meaningful and lasting, leaving no doubt in her mind that this chapter had closed with a clear and joyful ending for both herself and Adam.